I grew up on the northwest side of Detroit to a two-family household. My father was a Michigan State police officer and my mother was a stay-at-home mom. Me and my little brother growing up had engaged in sports because my father was really big into having us become athletes, following after his footsteps. We was raised in Catholic schools and private schools the majority of our years until my high school year. I went to Cass Technical High School. There, it would begin to see a change of events that would ever change my life. It was during my freshman year of high school that my parents decided to divorce and separate, and my father got transferred up to Saginaw, Michigan. When he got transferred up to Saginaw, Michigan, I basically was there with my mom, where I began to explore my options of, what some people would call smelling themselves. And it was during this time that I began to start acting out and getting in trouble and exploring, some of my relatives that was living in the street life. Some part of me was drawn to this way of life. I wanted to be something that I really wasn't raised to be. My parents raised me to be a good kid. I was an all-A student growing up until I got to high school. Well, during my junior year of high school, it was then that I met my wife, Deanne Winters.
He asked me for a dance, or asked if I would promise him to have at least one dance with him while at the prom, and I promised him that I would. We shared a dance. Afterwards, we exchanged numbers.
And it was at that time that she went away to college, that during my senior year, I kind of tightened my bootstraps up a little bit and started doing better in school. I went away to Wilberforce University, there applying for the Detroit Police Department. But because of financial hardships, I began to explore options of selling marijuana in school. It was after the first year of school that I decided not to go back, and I ended up coming back home. And there I took a refund check of $342. And a friend of mine matched $350, and I bought my first ounce of cocaine. Began selling drugs in Southwest Detroit, where I was then residing with my grandmother, until the Detroit Police Department began to call me up for beginning the process to become a law enforcement officer. November of 1995, I entered into the Detroit Police Academy, where I left the selling of narcotics alone, but still had that same mentality. I married my wife December the 16th, 1995, and graduated out of the academy May 1st of 1996. Upon graduating out of the Detroit Police Department Academy, I was assigned to the 8th Precinct, which probably was one of the biggest mistakes of my life, because it was there that I began to run around and get back affiliated with a lot of the guys that I grew up with.
I started noticing my husband wanting to go to the clubs more and more.
Every night, 7 days a week, I was in somebody's club. I began drinking a whole lot more.
The dynamics of our relationship just changed.
My activity level of being violent began to increase. And it wasn't until 1997, when I had encountered my now co-defendant, we began to plot about how we was gonna get money out here. On the Detroit Police Department, I began to observe a lot of officers knowing how much we made as a salary, but yet seeing the lifestyle that they was living in. My curiosity, I wanted to know how this was. And it was at that time that I made the decision to begin to reach out and start gravitating towards, I guess, what you would call the darker side of law enforcement. It was then that I started taking drugs from some of the local street gangs, and even much so, start putting the drugs into the drug houses themselves. We would do mock raids. We would begin to run through different individuals' houses, taking their drugs. It didn't make me feel good as a person, but at the same token, I constantly kept hearing the call of Christ. My marriage wasn't doing so hot.
We did a lot of arguing. We weren't bonding. When I would want to go to church, he did not want to go.
The Lord finally called me, and I came to church, said I was going to leave all that alone, but in the back of my heart, I still had those things residing. I still wanted that way of life. So it wasn't until March of 98 that I really stepped my efforts up, and the co-defendant that I now have, we began to take drugs as guys would bring them in from out of town, kilos of cocaine at a time we would take, coming and recuperating money from my co-defendant, extracting vengeance and violence until the death toll started raising. And that's what brought in the FBI, which eventually brought in our demise. It wasn't until November the 18th of 1995, I was on a police run on Woodbine and Telegraph, that I was called back to the station by my sergeant. Upon arriving to the station, I'll never forget, it was like the Malcolm X movie, when Denzel Washington was waiting to go to the Autobahn as Malcolm X, and it was like everything was rolling past me. It was at that time that I'm riding down Grand River on my way back to the 8th precinct that I knew my life would forever change. Because once I arrived at the station and I went back into the 7-0 office, the DEA and the FBI met me there, and they placed me under arrest, cuffing me with my own handcuffs, taking my service revolver and my badge off of me, put me in the back of their unmarked car, and they drove us downtown and to the FBI building. Once placed into the Wayne County Jail, I can begin to hear the people say, man, they done locked the police up.
And I realized that I would actually have to raise my daughter, or our daughter, by myself. It was very hard for me because I had never in my life desired to be a single mother, and definitely not to lose my husband to something as traumatic and as tragic as him going to prison.
While in the 7th precinct jail, me and my Heavenly Father had a talk, and I dedicated my life to him, and I told him, whatever it is you want me to do, that I'll do. And God met me in that jail cell. I was then transported to Wayne County Jail, where I was awaiting trial. I was awaiting to see what would be my final outcome. No matter how good my attorney was, the reality is that I was destined for a life of prison. Once I arrived into the federal system, I would then be taken to Lewisburg Penitentiary, Allenwood. It wasn't until July the 28th of 1999 that the Lord spoke to me through his word, 1 Timothy chapter 3. And he began to show me that who I was called to be was a man of God. And as I read the qualifications of a bishop, I realized, I said, I don't qualify for this. And yet the Spirit of the Lord told me, he said, I will qualify you. As I began to read God's word, he began to multiply into my spirit the revelation, the understanding of his word. I began to understand and see that who I wasn't who God created me to be. Once I arrived into the prison system, God elevated me quick. Men that had been in prison for 20, 30 years that knew the word, God raised me to be a leader over them. He made me an inmate pastor under the tutelage of chaplains in there. See, in there, guys study. They study because their back is against the wall. They see God's face seriously, wholeheartedly. There's not a lot of denominationalism. It's not a lot of empty rhetoric or fanfare or trying to be something you're not. It's a matter of developing a relationship with Christ, because you know that at this point in your life, God is all that matters. Everybody else turns their back on you.
After he got out, I could see that he really had changed, and he had grown phenomenally, and he was just had such wisdom of the word, and he was just a totally different man, a totally different husband. He was a great father. Our relationship grew so strong, and we bonded, and we could just really both love God together. It was just absolutely amazing.
The Lord started me off by doing a simple Bible study with my family of 4. And from the Bible study, they actually was surprised at my working knowledge of the word. And so they called other family members, and it went week by week. More and more family members would come, and we would cook food and, do the Bible studies.
He just had such a magnetic power with people, and he just had such presence and charisma about himself, and he could really cause people to engage in the things of God.
Everybody realized and said, you know what? This is our church. And it was there when I shared with them the vision of Christian Family Ministries. On one accord, everybody agreed about it. And that was the birth of the church.
A friend of mine actually invited me. And when I first met him, the first thing he told me was, man, we got to study together. I mean, that's definitely different coming from a pastor, like to have a personal relationship with him. I was like, man, that was a really good message. He was real hands-on of a pastor to me. Well, the first time you meet him, he already speaking into your life. So I leached onto him like a spiritual father. I was 19 at the time. I had just turned 19.
but I never really had that male role model example for my life where, you know, it could benefit me and steer me in the right direction.
We have just grown so much. I didn't know that I could really know the word like I do now, and I'm just very thankful for the relationship I have with my pastor and first lady. I mean, I really look to them as my spiritual parents.
He takes his time to go over the word, to simplify it for the members. He's always been available for us.
I really look to pastor as being that wise male person in my life that I can talk to, and that's not going to be judgmental, but that's really going to meet me where I am and just encourage me to step out on faith.
He can relate due to the things that he's been through. He's not judgmental. He's not trying to be traditional. And it's like, come as you are.
I definitely truly enjoy just being a part of this ministry. I am actually a minister at the church, and I truly enjoy just being able to serve up under such a powerful man of God.